Um, Thank you, Mr. Garnett, for joining Eye on the Biz. Here today we are at the Impact Exhibition Center to participate in what we see on our backdrop, uh, Dynamic Spectrum Alliance Global Summit 2013, which is the first global summit of DSA. Could you tell us a bit about your organization, how it was formed, and who are your major members?
So the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance is an organization comprised of research and development organizations, academic institutions, and different companies who are in the wireless ecosystem. So anything from large international brands like Facebook and Microsoft and Google, MediaTek, a large chipset manufacturer in Taiwan, all the way to small little startup companies that are doing work in the radio space. The reason why the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance formed in the first place is really to help address two challenges that are facing consumers around the world and governments around the world. One is issues around digital inclusion and finding ways to use new wireless technologies to help to expand access to broadband over wireless and make it less expensive. And then also to deal with the explosion of devices and the explosion of data on wireless networks, which is a particular issue in urban markets, really anywhere in the world. So even here in a place like Bangkok, there are going to be issues around spectrum being overused, and we need to find new ways to use these radio spectrum. So dynamic spectrum access really is the idea of using new technologies to use frequencies, radio frequencies, much more smartly so that we can create more bandwidth out of a limited amount of spectrum resources and make that bandwidth less expensive and make connectivity more ubiquitous so more people have it when they need it, where they need it. And so the idea is working with each other to help develop the technologies, but also working with government to help educate them about the technologies and then put the regulations in place that we need in order for these new technologies to become global.
Since I can notice that Microsoft is the main force behind this summit. Is Microsoft also the main force behind this new organization, DSA?
I wouldn't say that we're the main force. After all, there are 32 different companies and organizations that are the founding members of this alliance. But we have been quite active in helping to create this, and we got together with a small group of companies about a year and a half ago, and brought up this idea of, it's probably time for us to form a group that will work with government on the regulations. Now that the technology seems to be becoming more mature, it's ready to come to market, we've proven to ourselves that it's technically feasible. Now it's time for us to get together as a group and create regulatory models that can be harmonized on a global basis. And so that's the reason that we did this.
Okay, so explain to our audience, which I don't think that we are the technical audience here, how you're going to make the scarcity of spectrum to become abundant. What is the technology you are talking about here?
Okay, so in the world we live in today, broadband has become essential, right? I mean, people, for them to participate in the economy, for them to participate in society, internet access and broadband access is almost a given. People talk about it now as almost like a human right. And increasingly that broadband access is happening over wireless devices. So people are using their smartphones or their tablets or some other kind of wireless device to connect and connect to each other and use all of their social applications, Facebook, you name it, to interact with each other. And people are using those networks more and more. They're pushing more and more data on those networks. That's creating some real challenges. Traditionally, radio spectrum, or the frequencies, have been assigned to particular users for their exclusive use. And the problem is that you may have been assigned a spectrum, these frequencies, 40 or 50 years ago, but you don't really use them all that intensively. Now that might have worked just fine when people didn't really use wireless technology that much, but nowadays people use it so much that it's really taxing the system. So we have to come up with new ways to use these frequencies, new dynamic ways to gain access to these frequencies, so that we can basically turn what are very limited amounts of available frequencies to create broadband networks, to increase the total available bandwidth. So the idea is we have these new technologies where radios, like smartphones, like laptops, like tablets, become smarter, and they can choose frequencies based on what the application is, what the particular need is. And they're not stuck using one frequency. They can use different types of frequencies for different kinds of connections. And that will require changes to regulations, and that's the reason why we created this Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, so we can have that conversation with regulators to move forward on this.
And I think we heard the terms white space a lot, which is, I believe that is part of the technology that will make spectrum more wider accessible. Can you explain this term to us? What is the white space?
Well, the simplest way to think of white spaces is just any unused frequency. So think of the old TV, the old analog TVs that we had when we were kids, and you had the old knob on the TV, and you switched to one channel, and you had the broadcast on that channel, and then you switch to the next channel, and it's just the fuzz on the TV, and there's nothing there. Think of that as white space. Any unused channel in the TV broadcast frequencies would be considered white spaces. And then, not just in the TV bands, but any other frequencies. Any unused frequency, whether it's not been assigned to a particular user or it's just not being used at that particular time by someone who has a license. So that's white spaces. And so the idea is, can we use these new wireless technologies to gain access to these unused frequencies to deliver more bandwidth to customers when they need it and to reduce the cost of that access?
I believe that, if I'm not wrong, I think the people that when they allocate the frequency, they said in the old day that they have to leave certain space or something, so they no jams or no interference with each other. So what is the new technology that will be able to plug those gaps?
Yes. So traditionally in broadcast planning, so for broadcasters, there was a very large amount of frequency that was allocated for broadcast, and they were very high power. So you had really, really high power, so you could cover a large geographic area with your broadcast. So these were very high power transmissions, but the broadcasters were not able to protect themselves from interference very well. So they were very high power, and the TVs themselves couldn't protect themselves from interference. They didn't have good filters in the TVs. So you had to create big spaces between TV channels. So you wouldn't put channel 4 next to channel 5 in the frequency bands. You'd have to have a space between those two so they wouldn't interfere with each other. You also had situations where you frankly just didn't have a lot of broadcast, so you had a lot of unused frequencies because of that as well. Now, in the transition from analog to digital TV, you're able to have broadcasts closer together because you're going from analog to digital, but also because the digital television receivers are better at protecting themselves from interference. So you can have broadcasts occur much closer to each other. So, and that frees up a lot of frequency that could be used for other things without causing interference to broadcast. So even in the analog world, there is unused frequency, and you could operate at low power without causing interference to broadcast reception, and we've shown that in some of the projects we've worked with. But in the switch to digital, we're going to free up a lot of spectrum that could be put to other uses. So some of that will be licensed. You'll have some of that frequency will be freed up and licensed to the mobile operators, and then other frequencies will remain unused. And the question is, what kinds of regulations and policies will we put in place in order to put that spectrum to good use as well?
And are we gonna? Is this idea are going to make use of this unused frequency mainly for Wi-Fi broadband, or there are other purposes as well?
Radio frequency really is an enabler. It can enable all kinds of applications, all kinds of technologies. So the idea basically is we can use these unused frequencies for a whole host of applications. So it could be for Wi-Fi, it could be for a new kind of Wi-Fi. People call it super Wi-Fi, basically the idea of taking Wi-Fi technologies and Wi-Fi spectrum access techniques and putting that into these unused TV bands, these unused TV white spaces. Or it could be machine-to-machine types of applications, smart city applications. Or it could be something else we are not even thinking of right now. That could be something unexpected that we discover when we use these frequencies.
So in this break, Mr. Garnett has told us what is DSA, or Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. In the next break, he will discuss more details about what the new organization is doing, and he will also discuss some of the pilot projects that DSA has been doing in different parts of the world. So please stay tuned with us. So Mr. Garnett, during lunch we see some demonstration of Skype connection with at least Singapore and Tanzania. So we were told that that's your pilot location. Tell us about what are you doing now in Singapore and Tanzania.
Yeah, so very, very different projects because very different environments, right? So Singapore, just imagine think about the most, certainly among the most connected population in the world in terms of wireless connectivity. Very urban, developed economy, and so even in a place like that, they're thinking about making wireless connectivity even more ubiquitous than it is today. So they want to have even better than what they have, and they're experiencing real challenges around the amount of available frequency for them to be able to deliver applications they want to deliver to their citizens. And so in Singapore, we've partnered with 17 other companies, mostly Singaporean companies, ranging from StarHub, who's a cable mobile operator in Singapore, to startups in Singapore. And we're doing anything from kind of machine-to-machine, smart city applications, monitoring energy consumption, for example, trying to reduce energy consumption using remote sensors. Think of scenarios around flood control, so water sensor kind of scenarios, to broadband access. So even in Singapore, we're using TV white spaces for broadband access on, for example, the Singapore Island Country Club, and then also in the harbor with ships that are offshore, and using this TV white space technology instead of relying on satellite, which they don't really need if they're close to shore and it's too expensive. And we're working with the government, with IDA, the regulator, on that project, as well as I2R, the research and development organization there in Singapore. So that's the Singapore project. Tanzania, also an urban deployment, but a developing economy, right? So it's a country where the economy is growing quickly, but they have a long way to go, and the percentage of people who are actually using the internet is quite low still. Most people don't have devices. So in that project, we're actually going to build some TV white space and Wi-Fi networks on university campuses. So there's 4 universities right in downtown Dar es Salaam, and we're partnering with a local internet service provider called Uhuru One and the Commission on Science and Technology to build a proof of concept network. And the idea there is we will sell a bundle of low-cost connectivity device and applications to university students and faculty and staff in Dar es Salaam. The third project that we have going on right now in Africa is in Kenya. Very different again. So in that project called Mawingu, which means cloud in Swahili, we're delivering broadband access in rural areas. Now in Kenya, like in Tanzania, most people live in rural areas still, and most people do not have electricity where they live, so they're off the grid. So you can't deliver broadband access to rural areas in that part of Africa without also delivering them power. So the network we're building in Kenya is all solar powered. The base stations are solar powered, so the towers that create the broadband network are solar powered, and the end user locations are solar powered. So the idea basically is we have these what we call Mwingu agents who will be selling bandwidth, low-cost bandwidth, and charging. So someone will come to this location with a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop, and they will get their device charged up, and they will be able to buy bandwidth from this Mwingu agent. So it's a very unique project, and it's a very different approach to delivering broadband access, and it's quite innovative. And we're excited to be involved in all three projects.
In Tanzania, we saw that the connection is with a very, I believe, a very rural area. So are you trying to tell us that using this new technology will make Wi-Fi broadband accessible to poor people?
To the rural areas, yeah. Poor people in the rural areas. The idea basically is, can we deliver access? Can we deliver broadband access for people who live at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of income? So most people in rural areas in Kenya or Tanzania, they're not rich. They don't make a lot of money, and so, but they're not using the internet. And the biggest reason is because it's just not affordable to them. So can we work with partners in these countries to deliver really low-cost access, a tier of broadband access that sort of every person can afford? And so we hope that we'll be able to try that out in those markets and prove that it can be done.
And if your project or your idea of this become more widespread to the world, would that make broadband, Wi-Fi broadband, more affordable even in a country like Thailand or a kind of middle-income countries?
No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about it is that there are people, even in Africa, there are rich people, right? So there will be a tier of access for them that can be delivered with fourth generation LTE or through fiber, and they can afford it. But there are also a lot of people in those countries who can't afford what's being delivered today, and we need to figure out a way to reduce the cost of access for them. And likewise, in a place like Thailand, I imagine that there are people who do not have a lot of money to spend on broadband access, and they use it very sparingly. So we have to figure out ways to get the people who cannot afford it as much, get them online, get them a part of the economy, get them part of society. You know, increase social inclusion, increase digital inclusion, increase economic inclusion, create opportunities for small businesses in a place like Thailand, so that the economy can grow, especially in places like rural areas or in lower income areas of even urban markets.
I believe that in your the DSA will have to work with government regulators.
Yes.
Have you been facing any resistance, not understanding about what are you doing in country?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say it's necessarily resistance. I think it's a lack of understanding about what exactly is this technology, what can it do, what can it enable, and what sort of risks are involved in allowing it to happen. One of the concerns is interference to broadcast, and so there are legitimate concerns that allowing Wi-Fi-like access or unlicensed access in these unused frequencies in the TV bands will cause interference to digital television reception or even analog television reception. And so we've worked with governments around the world to basically prove that that's a concern that we can address through mitigation techniques. And part of the reason why we do these projects, these pilot projects, is actually to go into countries with local partners, with government partners, and show them that this can actually deliver some real benefit to their populations and at the same time not cause any risk to interference. So I would say less resistance than it really is sort of lack of understanding initially, and that's why we're trying to engage with them, and that's why, in part, why we help to work with other companies to create this Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, so we can engage with governments and help to educate them so that they can actually understand it better, and then move forward with the regulations that allow it to happen on a wider scale.
In this conference, we heard a lot about the term Internet of Things.
Yes.
Can you put in simple terms, explain to us, what is this?
So the Internet of Things, you think about increasing reliance on, instead of broadband being provided to the person, the idea is there increasingly will be devices that work on behalf of people. So think of remote sensor networks for agriculture. So maybe you have a sensor network that monitors water supply or monitors irrigation and better directs irrigation on the field so that you can grow more rice. Or you may have a sensor network in the canals in Bangkok that monitor water quality, so that the water quality can be improved here, and we can actually start using the canals.
Or even
more.
monitor for the flood.
For floods, for dengue fever or something like that, or different kinds of diseases. So you can have early warning. So those kinds of applications, smart city applications, monitoring the lights, CCTV camera networks, those kinds of scenarios. And the idea basically is more efficiently delivering services to the citizens, improving quality of life using these sensor networks. And the idea with Internet of Things is more and more of these kinds of wireless networks will be deployed, and there'll be more and more devices that will be connected to networks. And so the big challenge is how are we going to design networks, and how are we going to design spectrum policy and spectrum management in order to enable this to all happen. And
has what you just said been operational in any places in the world? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing more and more smart city applications being deployed around the world. Anything ranging from traffic light monitoring to water quality to, you name it, all kinds of applications, increasingly are happening around the world. And so we've got to keep up with this, and we've got to make sure that the policies are in place to enable this to all continue to happen.
So now we are in 2013. So what DSA is seeing in the next few years for the development of what you are doing?
Right. Well, the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, in many ways, is really a bet on the future, right? So this is a very forward-looking organization, and we're really at the beginnings of this. And while we're talking, for example, about TV white spaces, we know that increasingly radio frequencies are going to be shared using these new technologies. And that's needed because we need to find ways to use spectrum more efficiently over time, and people generally recognize that. So as we look forward, we will engage with industry and with government in a lot of different contexts, talking about a lot of different kinds of radio frequencies and a lot of different ways of getting access to spectrum. And so really this is just the beginning. It's very, I think in a few years from now we'll look back on this and we'll laugh at how basic our understanding is and how limited the range of issues we're looking at. And this is just going to expand and grow in a big way. And we're pleased that we're starting with the 32 companies that we've partnered with on this. But we think that it's just a matter of time, and more companies are going to get involved. More and more governments will want to engage. More and more research institutions and academic institutions will want to become members of this. And from our perspective, the sky's the limit on this.
Yeah. Today, our Eye on the Biz would like to thank Mr. Garnett a lot for this very educational discussion. And I think that we will have a lot to look forward to for what DSA is trying to develop for the benefit of the global population.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this great event today that we were involved in here in Bangkok, and the Thai people are obviously great hosts, and we've been happy to be here.
Yeah, our food is also very great. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.